Good morning, Happy New Year. I am Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School. Thank you for joining us this morning for our Business Over Breakfast webinar series. I'm so pleased to be back with you in 2021, renewing our commitment to bring you ideas to help shape our ever-changing world and give space and time for your questions, your learning and reflection. The start of a new year brings with it the hope of new beginnings. And while the first few days of 2021 have been disappointingly and dishearteningly challenging for all of us, these events and the surge in COVID hospitalizations underscore the importance of reflection and focusing on what's most important and what we can do to help create healthy, well-functioning communities, organizations, teams, and families. The Emory executive team has been reflecting for a while on what is critical for the leaders and organizations of the future, and top of mind are people, purpose, and growth. And we are leaning into these key themes with new development opportunities, fueled by new technologies, and a set of short and extended courses that I invite you all to dive into and explore. Today, we're going to build on some of the conversations we've had and think about building brands in today's world. At one time, the path to building a brand was understood and pretty straightforward. But in today's digital world, there are many factors to consider, thanks to social media, new technologies, AI and big data, and changing expectations. So what does it take to build a brand in the modern world? Rebecca Messina, our guest speaker today, is going to help answer this question. Rebecca has an amazing set of credentials and some very compelling ideas about what it takes to build a brand. Rebecca began her career, in fact, a 22-year career at the Coca-Cola Company, where she worked in global media and marketing roles, including in Chile, Australia, and France, and ultimately Atlanta, where she was Vice President of Global Marketing Capability and Integration. In early 2016, she took on the role of Global Chief Marketing Officer of Beam Suntory, responsible for the company's global brand strategy development and communications, product innovation, research and development, and consumer insights for Beam Suntory's world-class portfolio of brands. She then served as Global Chief Marketing Officer of Uber. In fact, that was Uber's first ever CMO, with the mission of helping the company define a strong brand in the hearts and minds of the consumers, the drivers, and the communities it serves. Last year, Rebecca and her family moved to Atlanta, and she now advises private clients as well as serves as a senior advisor with McKinsey & Company. So this morning, Rebecca is going to spend about 30 minutes or so sharing her own experiences on how to build a brand in the modern world. You're going to get the chance to answer some questions on the Menti poll, and then the session is going to be followed by Q&A. So please put your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen at any time, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we possibly can today. And as usual, at the end of today's session, there will be a very short 5-question survey that we would really appreciate you filling in. So enjoy the morning with Rebecca. And again, I encourage you to look at some of those courses and certificates that we have coming up in the next couple of months. Over to you, Rebecca.
Well, thank you and good morning. I know that actually some of you are on the West Coast, so thank you for extra special early morning. I hope I can keep you awake and deliver on that promise of at least an engaging conversation. I certainly don't know that I have the answers on this pretty big question, but I do have a unique vantage point of having served in some of the biggest 20th century brands, frankly, even 19th century brands. We'll talk more about that. And in, of course, some of the world's maybe most important or potential to have some of the most importance in our 21st century. I put this out here as a title slide because I don't know that it's truly out with the old. I'm going to talk this morning about a little bit of what's new and really what remains the same and how that comes to fruition in building brands in this world that we find ourselves. All the books have not been written. They've been written extensively about what it looks like to build brands in the 20th century. These are still being written. And so I'm going to give you some maybe wet cement, some ideas that I've experienced. Hopefully they may serve you in the roles that you play. But first, just to get us warmed up, I know for me, I do a lot on the West Coast time. So if you ask me how I'm feeling right now, I'm feeling a little frazzled because I don't usually start and have like any makeup or my teeth brushed, at 9 o'clock because I'm usually working on a different coast. But I'd love to hear just how you're feeling, but whatever that may look like, curious, excited, bored, hungry. Just would love to get a sentiment from the room. And they're coming in through chat. Nice. Use Menti, but I'm seeing some energized, ready, curious. Love it. Aspirational, sleepy. Great. Good. Optimistic. Oh, I love that word. Sleepy, intrigued, excited, confused. Good. Me too. Sometimes, most of the time. Hopeful. I hope hungry. Whoever said hungry, don't let it turn into hangry. Please eat. Determined. Oh, that's a nice word. Cool. Frustrated. Off balance. Nice. Cool. Thank you guys. This is super helpful for me to have a sense of where the group is at. I think if curious is the prevailing thought, that's great. Because this is a pretty curious topic and one that is, like I said, there isn't a right answer. So I hope to sort of maybe fill in some blanks for you. Challenged, isolated, nice, not nice, but real. And that's, I think, a true testament to where we're at. So with that, let me tell you really as briefly as I can a little bit about myself. I am here today in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've got a long Atlanta history, but my story is pretty simple. If I could see a show of hands, but I won't make you do it. But if anyone here is from Western New York, I'm from Buffalo, New York, really a small town called Batavia. It's not known for much, probably snow, as you well know, and pretty humble beginnings and humble roots. But my parents did a really good job. I come from a family of Italian immigrants, and they always kind of encouraged us to think bigger than that. And, I guess if I could say anything, small towns can lead to big worlds. And my parents sort of gave me this notion that I could be and do anything I really set myself to do. And I wanted to be a global citizen. I didn't really have a career in mind, but I had a sense of curiosity, that wonderful word that you guys used this morning. And that was what I wanted to be. So I really set out to be a global citizen, as much to my parents hated me saying that because they were like, does it pay anything? Like, how does that work? And the way I knew how to do that was through languages. They were my window to the world. I was fortunate that at a young age, I had a lot of exposure to the Italian language. And the closest thing I could study at school to do that was Spanish. So I really doubled down there. I then went on to college. I went to Miami of Ohio. And as I thought about this global citizenship and what I could study, I thought maybe I should study diplomacy and foreign affairs. So I ended up getting a major in diplomacy and foreign affairs and 2 other degrees in Italian and Spanish. And as graduation neared, I was like, now what? And thankfully, I was hell bent on this global citizenship, and I started applying to global companies, the big names in 1994. Your Deltas, your Home Depots, your Cokes, your Procter and Gamble. And I was very fortunate that I was working in Ohio for a family, and they knew someone who had just joined the Coca-Cola company as well. And he was gracious. He's also on this call. He's one of my favorite people, Scott McCune. And he was gracious enough to offer me an interview. And the best they could do for this 21-year-old was more than they'd done for most, which was an internship. And I was pretty hell-bent on staying in this global company. And so 3 months turned into 6 months and turned into a 9-month internship. And then the rest is kind of history. But what was beautiful about that time at Coke was it over-delivered on that global citizen. I was able to live and work for almost 10 years of my career. I met my Dutch husband when I was living in France. And ultimately that brought us back to Atlanta with the Coca-Cola company, him and I, again, continuing and kind of escalating our careers in global roles. I then, though, had this opportunity at kind of 22 years into my job at Coke. I was running the incubator. It's the part of the company which I used to call it the Department of Hope. Was my little internal world for it, because it was where we were working on really the company's smallest brands that we were investing in, brands that were really next generation. Think kombuchas, think Zico coconut water, think Fairlife milk. And it was amazing because it gave me such a view of founders and what that looked like, and entrepreneurial mindsets, and really gave me this juxtaposition of this big global brand experience that I'd had for 19, 20 years at that point, and then the opportunity to lead the incubator. I then got a phone call from a company you may or may not know, Beam Suntory. And why I say 19th century brands, I had brands that were founded in, the 17, 1800s in that company. And I had the family members that they're working for me, and an opportunity to lead R&D, a real end-to-end approach to marketing. So I took the opportunity to move to Chicago and go lead marketing for Beam Suntory. If you're a whiskey drinker, you probably know Maker's Mark or Beam, or you may know some of the Japanese whiskeys, Hibiki and others. A beautiful suite of brands, and an opportunity to bring together that big brand feel with some of the brands like you see on the screen, and then this really small craft movement that was happening and founder led in many cases. And then I got a phone call that was, to be honest, it wasn't as obvious as it might have seemed. It was Uber, and it was early 2018. And for those of you that have at all followed the Uber trajectory, 2018 was on the heels of a year called 2017. That's how the math works. But more importantly, 2017 was the year of Delete Uber. And Delete Uber was really a important moment and turning point for the company. Found itself with a significant brand reputation problem against a backdrop of tremendous growth. And in some ways, it even found itself with a product you wanted in your life and a brand you wanted to hate. And that's the theme we'll talk a little bit about today as well, this idea of product and brand. So I had the opportunity to lead and stand up the first ever global marketing organization. They had amassed in their short 9-year history at that point, 1,200 marketers around the world, without a single leader or really a point of view yet about what marketing could be or do for the company. But I had to go at that in such a very different way than a lot of what I had been taught about how brands were grown in the century prior. Upon leaving Uber, I started advising with McKinsey, and then have taken on a number of private clients as well that bring together these big brands. I get a lot of those at McKinsey, and these smaller brands that I get to help founders and CEOs think about how they might grow their business in today's world. So with that overly long introduction, it was a bit of a setup to what we'll talk about today. But I have to ask, and I'm curious, you don't have to name any of the 3 that I worked at. I promise I will not be hurt at all. But what brands do you admire? I'm curious what ones you love, and maybe I can even weave those in today as we talk about building brands. So tell me what brands you admire. Throw them out there. Yeah, no surprise, Apple, Brooks Brothers, Pixar, Chick-fil-A, yes, Warby Parker, awesome, P&G, Volvo, Disney, Hobby Lobby, Chanel, yeah, Lululemon, yeah, Sephora, Amazon, Nike, yeah, Mars, Adidas, Pez, what a great one. Forgot about them. Ben and Jerry. Oh, this is awesome. It's Chewy, LVMH, nice. Dove, UPS, yeah. CNN, yep. Apple prevailing here, as they tend to do. Awesome, excellent. This is great. And what I see here is such a mix of iconic, timeless brands, your Chanel's, and some of these brands that have just become such an enormous part of your life in a relatively short period of time, like an Apple. I'm also really curious on some of these brands and the role they've had in your life. And, we had another day, Athleta, yeah. Some of these lifestyle brands, Athleta, Lululemon, maybe they wouldn't have had the role in your life if it weren't for the last year, but, timely also really matters, and that idea of timely and timeless. So this is great. Thank you guys for being generous. But now, I staying with this brand you admire, in one word, why? Creative. Integrity. Yep. Quality. Look at that. Yeah. I love that. Trust, reliable, authentic, simplicity. So good. Brand identity matches brand image. Yes. Service. Great. Durable. Yeah. Relatable. Consumer experience. Excellent. These are great, you guys. Okay, awesome. These gives me some stuff to work with and to work in this morning. So thank you. Let me go back to sharing. So to set up, now that you've given us all that to work with, you've laid out a nice juxtaposition, if you would, of things we might have cared about in the 20th century and things we care more about in the 21st. And it's been enabled by what's gone on in our world. And let me try to explain. So what is so fascinating about what has happened is that this shift from the 20th century to the 21st century can probably most simply be captured in this notion of we've went from making to connecting. And if you think about how value has been created, we were raised in the 20th century on brands that manufacturers made, and they could push them out to us on their time frame when they wanted, and all of the value of that transaction, all of the value that was generated by that manufacturer happened inside their company. Their efficiencies, their processes, their supply chain, and they perfected those. What you see so very different in your 21st century brands is an outside in perspective, and all the value is actually created by connecting the outside world. This visual doesn't do justice, but this notion of a line of value starts here and we push it out. Where in the 21st century, if you think about what we were able to do and what this, started by mobile, we never anticipated the level of connectedness that we are now experiencing. These platforms allow us to connect the outside world and exchange goods, exchange services, exchange ideas in timeframes that we never anticipated possible. And you think about Airbnb exchanging homes, you think about eBay, one of the first exchanging services, you think about Facebook exchanging connections, and you think about Uber connecting passengers and drivers in real time so that at the click of a button, a ride could arrive. And when you think about these platforms, it is stark difference to what happened with and what happens in a manufacturer's mindset. And so with empathy, we think about manufacturer brands and how they're quickly trying to catch up to this 21st century and also optimize a connected ecosystem outside. And the good fortune that these companies that were born this way have, but yet there are a lot of characteristics about these fundamentals that have been established inside companies that I think we can also point to with some envy. And I certainly know I did that sometimes at Uber. So I lay this out and I want to continue the point a little bit. Would you buy a watch today from a company, one of the two companies on this chart? I think you would, and I bet you already own one. But what is so interesting about these two on a single page next to each other is that in the early 80s, they were neck and neck. And at some points, Dell even had greater market share. The difference is that Dell remained a product in your life, and Apple created a platform to manage your entire life. And it did so by connecting you to the outside world in ways that you never imagined possible. Similar question. Would you buy a car today from a company called Yahoo or Google? Now, you haven't probably bought a car yet from Google, but if they made one, you might consider it. You would never allow Yahoo to be probably anything more than some news and information in your life and maybe manage your email. Again, two companies that were neck and neck at a point in time. One decided to grow itself up on this platform of help and knowledge and information. and did so in ways that has connected everything from our children to ourselves, to each other, to our documents, to our life. And it's become a verb in our lives. Google it. And it has grown enormous, enormous value. And it did so by creating a platform. And so as you think about the 20th century versus the 21st century, it's very important to understand the stark difference of a manufacturer mindset and a connected mindset, and a notion of not just creating a product, but creating a product that has meaning as a brand, and that meaning can extend all the way out to a platform. So the first thing to think about as you put those two against each other is you have to find yourself in a space where you can create and expand the meaning of your brand. And truly, your growth depends on it. And I can give you a very stark example of even where the Coca-Cola company would have fallen short on this, because it held so true to a single product called Coke that you even doubted whether you could buy other things from them, you didn't even give them credit for what they were doing in the background, because there was so much emphasis on a single product called Coke that you didn't understand this total beverage that was being built, and the struggle the company has had to really become more expansive in your mind and in your life against headwinds that were telling them that the palettes are changing, but consumers weren't yet ready to give us credit for being more than a single product, a really beautiful and powerful product and brand, I might add. So expanding our meaning, our growth truly depends on it. The next is a very important idea, and a little bit controversial. Anyone who knows me knows that I am such a believer in brands and what they can do. But certainly living and working in Silicon Valley taught me the importance of watch my language, because that word doesn't mean in Silicon Valley what it means in other parts of the world, or what it means to FMCG companies. And because brands weren't born the way I know them in a manufacturer's mindset. In a manufacturing company, I owned the product pipeline. I could decide that the way this brand can grow is by launching something, or that we can launch a new brand, and we created that. It doesn't work that way in a lot of these 21st century brands that we talked about. Those products are designed by engineers. Engineers are frankly far more capable than me of telling you what is possible, but it's not always connected to what consumers may believe or even want right now, or even how they operate. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the end when I share some examples from Uber. But the other very important thing, and you guys said this in the Menti slides, the role of quality and quality products. No brand can fix that problem. No marketing in the world can fix that problem. And this was a statement. I had a boss once at Coke who told me this, and it is such a powerful statement, that if your product is unremarkable, the marketing is a tax you pay. And in the 20th century, you could probably have gotten away with that. You could market your way to belief in consumers' minds that this product is worthy. But today it doesn't work that way, because social media won't let that happen. We'll tell each other too quickly about the flaws in this product. And so the importance of product and standing on good products that you didn't give birth to in most instances as a marketer, but you can get much closer to, and certainly think important in my remit was to move marketing and product closer together. But we have to recognize that these brands are born differently and born from a different part of your organization. And so important is an incredible, remarkable product. And then frankly, your marketing is a lot easier. You will always hear this debate of, does product equal brand? In my mindset, in the 20th century, no. A product is something I use, and a brand is something I love or could love. A brand breaks a tie. A brand brings emotion. But this notion doesn't sit that well always in a lot of the tech companies, because the brand wasn't what was launched. It was a product that continually has new releases and new versions. And that builds the brand without almost consciously doing so, without a marketer coming over the top and yet telling you what we want you to think or believe about that brand. The problem comes in when you haven't created that brand air cover, a la Uber, and you're hit with a reputation. Consumers are left only to think what this thing in their hand is that they're using, with no memory or belief of, what do you want to be in my mind? What do you stand for? And a lot of those words that you mentioned as you talked about why you admire those brands. So this isn't a problem we're going to solve. It's a juxtaposition of two things that we have to learn to live with. It's a paradox almost of, how do we bring the product and the brand together, but how do we recognize that who builds our product is different than who it may have been in a different century, and how we build those brands is going to rely on a remarkable product. And then we can bring a point of view about what that brand needs to be. But we also can bring that point of view much earlier into the design of those products. But that's still a challenge for a lot of 21st century brands. So I didn't answer that question, unfortunately, and I know that's probably very frustrating. The next idea that I want to share is, controversial is not the right word, but frustrating, I guess, is maybe the word. So if you were to build your 20th century toolbox and you just looked at what you had in your remit, this list could go on. It is not meant to be exhaustive, but pretty much all of your 20th century brands were made up somehow of consumer research, strategy, demand forecasts, design, creative of some kind, content, development, of course, promotions, pricing, I keep going, channel strategies. And those are still fundamental to brands today. What is so remarkably different, however, is these two things that have come into our lives. And I don't need to spend any time on what they are, and they're not exhaustive in this list. I'm using these as huge words to encompass analytics, big data, AI, all of it. But what is embedded in this is also a bit of a cautionary tale. And so let me give you an example. I advise a lot of companies, and they come to either McKinsey or myself, and they'll say, help me build a tech stack, a marketing tech stack that encompasses everything on the right-hand side. The issue with that is they have no sense of how they might use it, but they feel some pressure that they've got to get in the data in the martech game. And while they do, I have seen them overbuild and underuse. So this too has to be part of your company's strategy. The second problem with getting so excited about this, and I will tell you, as a marketer, most of my career, I could only measure 50% at best of what we spent and what we did. And for a lot of your 20th century companies, that was good enough. Fast forward to my life at Uber, I could measure almost to the penny 80% of my spend. But what we did was fight over the 20%, because we have now grown expectations of our CEOs and our leaders that we can measure everything. And it's fundamentally not true, because marketing is still an inspired discipline, and inspiration cannot be completely measured. The other thing I would like to say about this is that in that space of digital and data science, these are incredible tools, but because we have them, they come with a huge responsibility, a responsibility on privacy and protection, and also an expectation from our consumers that if you know this much about me, you will use it for good and you will use it to my benefit. So it's a really disappointing consumer experience. And this goes back to building all those tools. If you're going to build all those tools and have all this information and give consumers a 20th century experience still, then you're wasting that. Use these 21st century tools to solve 21st century problems and deliver 21st century solutions that are personalized. And the next thing I would say about that is, in these tools, and because it is a inspired discipline, hold the tension on that 20%. Don't try to solve it and go, let me get you to 90% of measuring everything, because you will lose the soul in your brands and in your businesses, because we can't and we shouldn't attempt to do that. We should use these tools for what they're meant to do, to measure that which should be measurable. But at the end of the day, our brands have to be meaningful. Humanity needs us to give us these North Stars, these things to believe in, these places to look to. And we can't do that if we can only build that which can be measured. So I encourage you as leaders to hold this tension for your organizations, because creativity can't be measured to the penny, but yet we know that brands that embed creativity and have strong creative organizations that are diverse are more profitable. We know that, but we don't know it in the minute. And some of these tools have really conditioned us to believe that we can do things in a minute. That gets me to a topic I love, and it's the timeless topic of this. And it was embedded in a lot of your comments as well on Menti, about why you loved these brands and they were authentic and they were real. And you can't do that if you aren't paying attention to who you serve. And by the way, who you serve today, because you're connecting this outside world, is a much greater list of stakeholders than maybe you would have had in your 20th century. You would have communities you serve. I actually believe the environment as a stakeholder just has less of a voice. You have in Uber's case, we had drivers in restaurants and your customers. Your stakeholders are an enormous base, and we have to have empathy as marketers and leaders for what that can really look like. And one of the things that I brought to Uber, and this slide, this view helped me do this. So this is an actual screenshot taken right around my early days in Uber. So when you Googled Uber, this is what you got. And it sort of explained a lot without saying much, if you would. You see phones in hands. You see a guy's head cut off even. You don't see smiles and faces and people and humanity. And I was brought in to ultimately help create, bring meaning to this brand. And I then was talking to the team one day, and this number has moved on significantly. But I asked somebody, do we have a sense of how often people talk in cars? And they were like, yeah, actually, we do. We know that at about 50% of the time, people have a conversation with their driver. And by the way, if that conversation is about how much they hate Uber, you can forget all the marketing in the world you want, because I can't market us out of that, back to the bad product. But we also know the average time of a ride is about 15 minutes. And so we were able to do the math of the number of rides, and boom, and you get to a number that is just enormous about an exchange of humanity. And even if I'm wrong by 20% on this number, the point is we were sitting on something so beautiful that two strangers have come together at the speed of light, and many times are having incredible conversations. And yet the best we can do is this when you Google Uber. And so I stood up a mission for the company or for marketing, I should say, that had 3 pillars. The first is the only one that was going to get me in the door, which was we have to drive demand. The second was we had to deepen meaning. And that was to really help change that. And you don't do that through words at a company today. You do that through actions. And you're seeing, to their credit, all this work on safety and so many other things that they're doing that were really barriers to us having meaning, and how they treat drivers. And they're really putting a lot of effort into that. But the third was embed humanity. And that also meant how we did research, how we built products, how we looked at D&I, how we looked at inclusion, what we cared about, where we put our money. And it was powerful. If I hadn't really gone in, maybe with that 20th century view of empathy and that consumer centricity, that maybe we wouldn't have been able to make that bit of a leap. Last and final story, and certainly I know there's a chat full of questions, and we'll have plenty of time for that. But it's a story about a company that's not far away from me here. I'm in Atlanta, and it's a story about the Coca-Cola company. And for me, it is a tale I learned early, and it's grown in its meaning to me. And I think it encompasses a bit of what I've already talked about this morning, because it touches on so many things with such a very, very simple story. I chose this visual because it's a story about New Coke. And as you guys may or may not know, in the early 80s, and many of you know this story, but you may not know the backstory. We were losing share to another big company called Pepsi. And the belief of leadership at the time was that it was a taste problem. And so there was a brief written, and actually a reporter in Kansas wrote about this losing share. And the internal code name for the project became Project Kansas. But the research brief that went out was really ended up being an R&D brief about creating a sweeter Coke. You all sort of know what happened from there, and how creating that sweeter Coke created enormous sort of turmoil for the company. And what would have taken 75 minutes today with social media took the company 75 days to turn that decision around. We have another wonderful asset here called the world of Coca-Cola. And in the world of Coca-Cola, well, we also have this thing called the archives department. And archives is a very special place where it houses all of that history of the company. And there was an incredible man named Phil Mooney who ran archives. And as marketers, we tended to get to know him because he was gold for us in the stories he could help us with, and the assets he had, and putting Coke on the moon and other things. And but one time we got to talking, and he said, have you ever heard some of the stories about the consumers that called in during the time of the new Coke and what they said? And he went on to tell me, and he let me listen to a conversation of a woman. And so he went on to tell me about all these people that would call. And they would call and call and call, and they would call the receptionist. And there was this wonderful Southern woman who was the gatekeeper, and she wasn't letting anyone past her. And she would listen to their call, and she'd say, "Oh, thank you, ma'am, for the feedback," etc. But there was this one particular woman who was relentless in her calling of the company. And she insisted she speak to Don Keogh, who was the president at the time of Coke USA. And she called so many times that eventually this receptionist one day, when Mr. Keogh came into the building, she said, "If this woman calls today, could I put her through to your office?" And the woman, and he said, "Yes, you can." So sure enough, as would have it, she called in, and they put her through to Mr. Keogh. She goes on and she starts screaming. This is on, like, I could hear this. She is screaming at him. "You are so stupid. How could you do this?" But he can hear that she's not a young woman. She might even be in her 80s. And she is screaming at Mr. Keogh. And he says, "Oh, ma'am, thank you for the feedback." He's wonderfully gracious. And he said, "Can I ask you a question? When was the last time you actually drank a Coke?" And she said, "I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 years ago." And he said, "With all due respect, why do you care so much?" And there's a pause in the call, and she said, "Because you just messed with my childhood." And there you have it. The brief wasn't about a taste. It was about a brand as we knew it, that was consumers' brand in their minds, and the moments it had in our lives. It touches on empathy. It touches on a timeless product of tremendous quality that held a place in her life that was so, so important. And when you think about, there's Mr. Keogh and Mr. Goizueta, and when you think about what that brand was for her, it wouldn't have gotten there if it hadn't had that incredible product, that incredible humanity, that togetherness of product and brand that we were able to be so hyper focused on. Yet it does fall short in today's world sometimes, as it relates to really having created that platform. And so just is pulling all of this together. I just want to remind you, we started talking about designing the outside and how important it is that we understand making versus connecting. Seeking to unite, it will be an ever evolving 21st century story on product and brand. The importance of expanding our meaning so that our growth can come as a platform. Using 21st century tools carefully, wisely, and no matter what, enabling us to always lead with empathy in the businesses and the brands that we serve, the consumers that we serve. So with that, I've talked way too much. Over to you guys, and I'm happy to answer anything.
So thank you so much, Rebecca. That was fascinating, and the Q&A is filling up. So let's jump in. Derek Hambrick asks the question: is creativity taking a more central role in branding as we're moving to a more personalized and consumer-driven brand experience?
I think creativity is taking an expanded meaning for sure, meaning it's creativity of marketing tools. It's our creativity in how we go to market. It's our creativity in how we reach consumers. It's creativity in how we bring consumers in. So I think creativity has become more important than ever, and it's gone from a narrower definition of something you do in a campaign or a film or a video, and it has become increasingly important because consumers are faster than us now. And that creativity that used to be super baked and take a long time is no longer able to do that. And so our creativity, our agility is really become heightened. And those brands that are able to use that creativity, I think you see them able to win more than others. So I love that question. I love that you lead out with creativity because it's timeless in our need for it. It's just evolving, I think, in its expansiveness.
Mm-hmm. And another question: what role does the individual, that is the consumer, have in developing or influencing the development of brands?
Oh, more than ever, way more than ever. That making mindset, well, it was research driven. It was often the time between a product that was researched and a product to market was very long. In some cases, sometimes very, very long. Today, we are testing in real time. We're able to launch, and that's the beauty of particularly some of these 21st century brands. You're able to launch, test, and beta, get feedback, make it better, incredibly iterative. So, I mean, consumers are more powerful than ever. And then we will only grow in our empowerment and the power that we can play inside companies. And I do think this is also the responsibilities of the leaders. I think sometimes we do believe that we know more than consumers or the stakeholders that we serve. And while we may see things they can't, I think we have to weave that finally. But yes, I think consumers have a greater voice than ever. And it's just a question of the time lag and where you sit on that spectrum.
Thank you. For smaller service providing organizations that may not have access to the wealth of data as some larger ones do, what key metrics would you suggest that we measure, to understand both the strengths of the brand and, more importantly, the value of our marketing efforts?
That's a great question. I think for service company that might be a little bit smaller, sentiment can be measured in a lot of ways. For some companies, we have this incredible social sphere. We can look at the digital ecosystem and measure. For others, it may be through the calls you get. It may be through how you transact with your customers, if you're a B2B business. But actually even standing up someone who's in charge of that, who really is able to capture, call it what you want, customer service, customer excellence, customer relations, whatever that may be, who can capture sentiment in whatever tools you do have, I think is their base metric for understanding consumer sentiment and power of your brand. The other interesting one is as you change your pricing structure, you can often tell the power of your brand and what your brand can sustain. If price is what we ask you to pay and value is what you're willing to pay, you're often able to see the power of a brand in somehow in a pricing construct. And I think there was a part 2 to that question about what tools might they use or something. I might have missed the second part of the question, or did I answer it?
Sorry, I think you did answer.
Okay. If I didn't, let me know. I can certainly come back on that.
Yes, no, I think you did answer that. Thank you. Since analytics are so important, how do you use them to get to the human element?
Good question. So this is where the teams of analytics can vary greatly. What Beam Suntory would call their analytics team is very different than what Uber would call that. And whatever it is, it's analytics for them, right? And so the access that you're going to have to your analytics team, your what would maybe have been formerly known as your knowledge and insights team or your strategy team, we can sort of change the nomenclature, but the access to that is imperative in my mind as a marketing leader, but it's not always that obvious or that easy, because those analytics are used to do more than what we knew them in that knowledge and insights world. So today those analytics power the company in all aspects of the company, our performance marketing engines, maybe your incentives, you name it, your pricing structures, how that marketplace is being run, drivers and surges and things like that. Where in your 20th century companies, this is not bad, the way those analytics are being used are more consumer driven analytics. So first, I think you have to understand what kind of company you're in and to know what kind of analytics are obviously powering that company. And then where does the marketer need to plug in and where does the marketer need to stay out? So in the former, I would assume I might even own all of that analytics, and there might be some that also holds up, maybe the finance department and others, but for the most part, I'm sitting on a lion's share of those analytics. And they're probably analytics driven by or driven in search of consumer insights and giving me back what I may need to kind of run my marketing efforts real time and measure you. In the other, I may be sitting on 20% of the analytics, but those 20%, I need to know how they're serving me, I'm feeding into what I'm doing. And there was an expectation at Uber that it was very, very real time. And so therefore your proximity to that and how you worked with that was incredibly important and frankly couldn't enter the room without it. So I don't know if that completely answered it, but not all analytics will lead you to the human centricity. But the other thing is I felt that I could brief my analytics team with things that I wanted to know. An example, we often ask how people feel about our brand, but we didn't often ask about what barriers there were for our brand. That was not a typical question that Uber asked. And it wasn't until we started asking that question that we got to safety being such a barrier. And that was what was still holding back people from taking that first ride, if you would. So hopefully that helped answer that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And I know this is a huge area of interest and research for some of our faculty at Goizueta. So we've had a couple of them on, David Rodriguez, talking about some of these factors. And then I think you pointed to another.
Sorry, I've got a dog in the background here that if I go on mute, I can't answer the question, but if I don't go on mute, you got to listen to her.
That's all right. We're used to dogs in the background. Another factor is the imperative of breaking down silos. So marketing has to be able to reach out to finance and has to be able to reach out to those that own the data and are collecting data across organizations, and that just requires, again, new skill sets and new mindsets.
And Nicola, you touched on something I think I underserved even in here, which is if you asked me the role of the marketer today, I think it is the unifier. I can't think of anybody else in the company who has to touch more departments, to your very good point. That's your product and brand, that's your analytics, that's your financials, every aspect of that product development, you name it. And I really do believe that. And this notion of even creativity is tricky because we like to keep people out of that process, right? Because it's a tricky process to get too many hands in. But marketing and your marketing leaders of today, and I think your CMOs that I'm really admiring are those that really understand integration at the C-suite level and how their teams work across the company. So thank you for bringing that up.
My pleasure. Another question. Social platforms are, of course, a key aspect of brand building. And there is a growing movement to address the reality that the race for human attention has unleashed invisible harms to society. How will brands adapt, or how should brands adapt to this growing movement?
Yeah, so well worded. We've all seen the social dilemma and all the good and the bad. First, a tiny bit of empathy from having been a little bit on the inside here of that is that because these brands grew so fast. So I'll just take Uber. The way Uber grew so fast was go alone. And what do I mean by that? launch Spain, and they fully empower an individual in Spain to launch that business in that country. And they don't want them to be super connected to every other part of the company right now because it would slow them down. You couldn't get as big as they got in 9 years, into 10, 12, 11 years now, if they didn't. At the same time, it's an unregulated business, as were all of these social companies, right? It's an unregulated sphere with it's borderless and boundaryless. And so they grew not because they were trying to necessarily have these unintended consequences, but it was sort of a function or a byproduct of fast. Now we are all living with that. And now there is some intentionality of creating that network in a way that could do some harm. And so I think that's where our leadership comes in. I believe that if you're in a business that's unregulated, regulate yourself. I have really worked in three. In a way, sugar is getting more and more regulated. Certainly spirits, and now rideshare and the gig economy is getting regulated. So the first way is to self-regulate. And you guys talked about those reasons you love brands you love. It's because they have integrity and quality and authenticity and they're values driven. And that's not going to go away. And so if you're unregulated and there are unintended consequences brewing, it is on the company itself to really get at that and set up a set of values, set up a set of guardrails, have internal policies, really realize the responsibility that you have, and be unapologetic about those guardrails, because there is a lot of harm that can be done. And listen, that works in 20th century companies too. We monitored how we advertised to children or didn't advertise to children, how old the audience had to be before we could run certain advertising. Same in spirits. It's important and necessary because we have the tools that more than ever to change behavior.
Thank you. That's critical. Can you talk, sort of building on that, can you talk about how we link brands to building and promoting sort of purpose of an organization? How do those things work together?
It's the only place I know to start. And I probably drive teams crazy when I come in, and even some of the companies I advise today, it's everything in a way. And you see companies really lose their way. If you believe your purpose is this thing in the hand, you've missed the point. And that's a bit of that visual. So I would really, because it's so much more than an idea or words. It will drive your growth. It will drive your choices. It will drive the yes and no. And the way to get at that is, there's a lot of known ways, but over time you've created, like it or not, equity in consumers' mind, right? Whether you were intentional or not, it's always important to understand where you stand. And by the way, I advise some small companies who don't have any tools to measure that. I just interview the leadership of the team and just, what do you believe you stand for? Scour their social media and see what consumers are saying. There's data to be had anywhere, but that purpose, that sense of why a company exists, is a step too often skipped and very often regretted in skipping it. And so I think it's something we need to do always in getting back to why these companies exist. It doesn't have to mean you have to fulfill that entire mission out of the gate, but it's that idea that we talk about what we are versus what we can be. And I think that's the distance that we have to create. And very often we stay in here. We are an app. No, you're not. You're an app that does something else. Bring me there.
Right. We've got lots of questions here, Rebecca. Let me see. This one, can you share some examples of how you built humanity into the Uber brand and how that relates to employee engagement?
Yeah.
We're asking employees to do more with less, and the challenge with balancing those social justice issues. So it seems increasingly important to connect that external brand perception to an internal brand perception and reality.
I love that question. And I don't think I doubt if I were there today, I would feel that we were there all the way. I think this is an ever evolving situation. And so I actually found at the time when I got there, a external issue and an internal issue, right? And I'll be honest, don't tell me about your house on fire on the outside if your house is on fire on the inside, and those two worlds aren't related. So it's all connected. So whoever asked the question is very, very wise, and people will quickly point to the inside. In this instance, they were both suffering from a similar problem, and they had a great one was a CEO who brought stability and a calming voice and, and really was able to talk to both as humans, drivers as humans and employees as humans. But then these companies are going to do actions like cut the workforce in ways that feels unhuman, unfair, unempathetic. And it goes back a bit to connecting to that purpose. What is our purpose, and how does the work we were doing before contribute to it or not? And has that work gone away or not? Often we don't close those gaps. And we're trying to do all of the things we used to do. We're trying to serve drivers in ways we never have. We're trying to serve consumers, or sorry, our internal constituents, our employees. And it's an absolute puzzle piece. So I think it's an important tension to remember that your brand starts on the inside, your culture, that these are the people that are building the brand. So if they are unhappy, that translates into the work they do. It translates into the drivers, the restaurants, and all of those we serve. And so it's probably the most important work you can do before you can go to the outside. But if you leave the outside lagging for too long, you're going to have quite the gap. But it's easier to catch up with an empowered and struggling an empowered workforce. So start there. And I'm really glad the person asked the question.
Mm-hmm. So I hope we have time for this. The one last question. So what's the single best advice you would give a CEO or CMO who's trying to really evolve to a more modern approach to brands and marketing?
Yeah. So start somewhere. It can be daunting. And most often people are going to jump to the tech. And while that's true, I would start with strategy. Like, what is it we're trying to do in this 21st century world, and what 21st century tools do we need to do that? And so I would give them advice of revisit your strategy. Is it 21st centuryized? Is it really up to date? There are tools to help you do that for sure. And hire a CMO or a marketer who really understands the connectivity that's going to be needed in both the outside world and your internal ecosystem to bring that to life.
Thank you so much. Tiffany, I think it's over to you now.
Yes, thank you, Nicola. And thank you so much, Rebecca. We have thoroughly enjoyed having you here with us today and being a part of the Business Over Breakfast webinar series. So again, thank you so much. Just a couple of things to share with our wonderful audience members who come back each and every Thursday. We want to share what we've got going on in Emory Executive Education. Next week, we will be joined by our very own Goizueta faculty member, Wesley Longhofer, for Transforming Business to Build a Climate Smart World. So again, that's next Thursday, January 21st, same time, 9 to 10 a.m. So we look forward to seeing you there. We also have an upcoming special event with the Goizueta Business School. Our deans in our different areas of Emory Executive Education, our very own Nicola Barrett will be there, along with our dean of our admissions office and executive MBA, for you to join us to just talk about how we can assist with your learning journey, your educational plans, and your goals. That's going to be on January 26th at 8:30 a.m. Registration and details is located in the chat, so we look forward to you all joining us for that. And then, of course, we've got some upcoming workshops. We've got some upcoming courses we'd love for you all to join us at. Information, registration, and more details about our certificate programs. The link is also available in chat as well. So we hope you all will take a look and join us for some of those and continue to your journey with us here at Emory Executive Education. The last couple of things are the recording, of course, as always, will be available on the Emory Executive Education page. So if you'd like to go back and revisit Rebecca's Business Over Breakfast session with us today, you can do so there. That link is in chat as well. And as you all joined this morning, there is a survey in your web browser. So if you would take a moment before you leave today to fill out that survey, give us some feedback on today's session, we would greatly appreciate that. Rebecca, I'll turn it back over to you for any final words, comments, or thoughts before we leave.
No, thank you so much for the opportunity, for waking up here with me today. I hope I left you with some things to think about. And all I can say is 2021 empathy will be key for all of us. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next Thursday.